Welcome to the Surviving a Toxic Boss webinar. I'm Elizabeth Walenchek. I'm one of the Associate Directors for Coaching at Career and Leadership for MBA and Alumni here at the Kenan-Flagler Business School. I'm so glad you could join me tonight. If you are facing a situation with a difficult boss, or maybe you've just been through one, or maybe you're wondering how difficult your situation with your boss is going to get, I'm glad you're here because this is a kind of a difficult topic to deal with in real life. I know I've dealt with it myself. I've seen friends and family members go through this as well. And it can be very difficult, but there are ways to handle it. And I hope that if you're in that situation, you're going to feel more equipped and more confident about handling this and navigating this situation in a positive way. So let's go ahead and get into our content. So first I want to share with you the learning agenda. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the difference between a difficult boss and a toxic boss. Sometimes we use those terms sort of interchangeably, but there is a little bit of difference. We really want to focus in this session on what might be truly considered a toxic boss. A lot of people are sort of difficult. We're all difficult at times. But what if you have really a toxic boss? What is that and how do you handle it? We're also going to discuss the key element of the psychology of survival. Now you notice on the right hand of the screen there we have a picture of all these like survival tools, like if you were out in the wilderness and you had to survive by your own, on your own or something like that. And we're actually going to be using a lot of knowledge and thinking from actual survival training in physically dangerous environments. There's a lot of things that are similar about it, and we can easily use that as sort of a metaphor. And so that's what we're going to be doing throughout this session. We're also going to talk about a survival plan by talking about the six main emphases of a toxic boss survival plan. What are those sort of broad categories of what we want to be looking at and thinking about? And that's coming directly from sort of survival training. And then lastly, we're going to talk about some specific survival strategies and tactics. What are some of the practical ways you can kind of help mitigate the effects of a working for a toxic boss? And most of this, not everything, but almost everything in this session is based on this little book called The Toxic Boss Survival Guide, and it's produced by the Center for Creative Leadership, which is actually a world-class provider of, it's a nonprofit, but it's a provider of leadership training and services, and it's actually just up the road here in Greensboro, North Carolina, and it's been around a long time. I was aware of Center for Creative Leadership years ago, long before I ever moved to North Carolina or came to Kenan-Flagler. So it's a really great organization. And in this book, what they did is they did some research, and they did a survey of people that were affiliated with their research community. And they were often, I think they were managers and some HR people and kind of a blend of people. They ended up having 384 respondents across 65 countries. So this isn't just about US folks. And they asked them a lot of questions about having a toxic boss and what happened and how did they handle it and things like that. And that's where almost all of the content from tonight is coming from. So I wanted to give them credit for that. But I thought it would be a good topic that people would benefit from hearing about. Because often when you're undergoing a situation like this, you often feel like you just don't know what to do. You don't know who to turn to or whatever. And so I wanted to give you some thoughts about that. So let's first define what is a toxic boss. Well, let's first start with figuring out what's a difficult boss. A difficult boss may be ineffective. They might be unqualified. They might be challenging to work with, but usually the situation is at least a little bit, if not moderately so, workable. Okay, so there's often ways you can kind of build a better relationship, build a better interaction with a difficult boss. A toxic boss, on the other hand, often uses destructive behaviors, sometimes intentionally, maybe not always, but sometimes they may, to serve themselves and their agenda, which can cause excessive harm to both their subordinates, but even their coworkers. Sometimes this kind of toxicity isn't always top down. It can go sideways with people's peers and things like that, although we're talking tonight about what if it's your boss. But that's a little bit different. These people are often just all about themselves. They may display really narcissistic tendencies. That's always a hard word for me to say. You're probably hearing a lot about narcissism. It seems like that word is everywhere lately. And what we're not talking about narcissistic personality disorder, which is a psychiatric situation. Um, some of these people may have that personality disorder, but that's not really what we're talking about. We're just talking about often it's narcissistic behaviors. And the key to that, narcissist comes from a Greek myth about this person that was so, they saw their reflection in a pool of water and they were in love with themselves. And so that's really what it's about, where the person is just all focused about themselves and they're not really attending to, they're not aware of, and they just don't care about other people. And so they do things that serve themselves, even if it hurts others. And that's often a kernel of kind of what's going on here. And not always, I'm not here to diagnose people or anything like that. I'm not expecting you're advocating that you do that, but that's kind of often a key thing with the toxic boss is they're really just serving themselves and pretty much no one else. And what is the deal with toxic bosses? Where do they sort of reside? Where do they show up? And why? Why are they there? I before I came to Kenan-Flagler, I worked for a consulting firm that provided career consulting to people who had lost their jobs. Their company would hire us to assist these people that they separated from the company. And I heard a lot of sort of war stories of people of difficult situations. Some people lost their job and they had a great boss, they had a great organization. They were really sad to have to leave. But sometimes people would tell me tales of how difficult it was to work there and things like that. And I always wondered, how come people above these horrible bosses never saw anything what was going on? So we're going to talk about that because this book had some insights into it, which I really appreciated. So first of all, toxic bosses can appear in all sectors, private, public, and even nonprofits, including education for that matter. Lots of times I've had clients who think if I could just be in a nonprofit that is there not to make money but to serve people, I'm sure it's going to be somehow a kinder, gentler kind of environment. And I'm here to tell you that ain't necessarily so. It could be, but not necessarily. There's toxic bosses even in nonprofit, even in helping organizations. Sometimes they're even worse. They are for reasons I won't go into now, but they can happen really anywhere. But why? Why do they exist? How do they get away with this? It was always so frustrating to me because it hurts the organization. If even if you're not a person who cares about people too much, if you were supervising someone who is a toxic boss to the other people below them, you think you would care about that. Don't let them do that to the staff. It's going to run people out of the company and things like that. But here's some reasons why they may get away with this. First of all, some dysfunctional personalities can be absolute masters at image control, and narcissists are often that way. By the way, they may treat you badly, but somehow they know a little bit of right from wrong because when they have to deal with the people above them, they know how not to display those behaviors and they can act very nice and gracious and even sometimes charming. But yet they can be really difficult to deal with other folks. And so that's part of the problem there is they kind of really get really good at hiding it. And also their ability to wield authority. Well, let's face it, sometimes it gets results because they just terrorize people into getting things done. And so they will get results often. Another reason is the organization may actually endorse their tactics rather, as a legitimate way to manage. They have sort of a similar mindset, like, it's dog eat dog world out there, and you just have to be hard on people and get them to produce and don't take it easy on people. You got to show them who's boss and that kind of stuff. So they may have a culture like that. Or sometimes the organization doesn't go that far, but they just don't want to believe. They just don't want to accept that this kind of bad behavior is taking place in their organization, or they just don't want to deal with it. And that happens as well. So those are some of the reasons why sometimes this will go on for a while in an organization and nothing happens. But the reality is that these behaviors have consequences, and they often do run people out of. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait. I'm sorry. My mouse is like incredibly sensitive when I'm in Zoom for some reason. But there are costs to this, costs in attrition, in actually lowered productivity because people are so stressed out, and things of that nature. So there are costs to it. And it's interesting to note from the study from Center for Creative Leadership, they found that toxic bosses often will derail eventually. They will derail. So some of this bad behavior will often catch up with them at some point. So before we shift gears a little bit here, any comments, questions, maybe something that you've experienced that you wanted to share, or just a question you had about what I've been talking about so far before we move forward into actually looking at the psychology of survival? Udo, I'm going to ask you to turn your camera off if you would. It kind of helps me save bandwidth. Thank you. Okay, so let's get on to the psychology of survival. So as I mentioned earlier, often it's almost a sign of a toxic boss that they don't change. They're not really receptive to criticism or even feedback or input. So if the reality is that you can't change a toxic boss, you can't really, I mean, it's really not our job to change other people. It's not always that even possible to change other people, really. But sometimes we can kind of influence them and influence how they interact with us and things like that, certainly. But if we can't change a toxic boss, then we need to shift our focus because that's really what we want to do, but we can't. But if we can't, focus on what you can change. And the things that you can change are your own thoughts and reactions to this behavior, your attitudes, where you put your attention, and your own actions. And so that's what gives you some leverage and some empowerment in a sense of where you can kind of direct your energy and your thoughts to maybe navigate this situation more successfully. And so let's look at this survival plan for the 6 toxic boss survival priorities. And this is actually borrowed from survival training. And for example, here we go with that mouse again. Let me go back there for a second. So it's interesting. First of all, I want to point out that to deal with the toxic boss, this is a plan. You can't really expect to just deal with a toxic boss on the fly and expect that it's going to come out well. You really shouldn't step away. Maybe it's out of the office, even your home time, unfortunately, to really think about how am I going to handle this most productively. So have a plan. And then, excuse me, it's also, I think, worth knowing that there's decades of survival research, like the U.S. Air Force survival training and stuff like that, that shows that actually, while the physical aspects of survival, because we're talking, I mean, again, I'm blending this, I'm using this as a metaphor, the being in a truly like survival situation, like in combat or you're stranded somewhere in an uninhabited place or something like that. But the things you do to physically survive that are certainly important. But actually, research has shown that the physical aspects of survival run a second and even a distant second to the mental aspects of survival. So it's very important what you're thinking and where you're putting your mind. And to drive this point home a little bit, UNC in the last few years has occasionally offered active shooter training. And one of the things that really struck me there is the instructor, who is a law enforcement professional, said when people are in those kind of situations, the ones that are most likely to survive, and this is no, I'm not faulting the people who didn't, of course, there's no way I would do that. That's at all. But the people who survive are the ones who think they're going to survive. They tell themselves, I'm going to get out of this. They have to focus and just say, I'm going to get through this. And that often really actually, believe it or not, helps people get through it. So let's look at these 6 pieces. First one is, I'm going to tell you what the 6 elements are, and then we're going to go into each one. First one is what they call PMA, positive mental attitude. So that's kind of what we were just talking about. I'm not saying you're being cheerful about it necessarily. I don't mean that kind of positive mental attitude. I'm just meaning it's like somewhat optimistic in the extent I'm going to get through, I can do this, that kind of an attitude. Shelter, creating some kind of physical or psychological space, some distance from the situation. Food and water is needed in a survival situation. And the corporate environment, when we're trying to survive, it's more about practicing self-care, taking care of yourself. Don't neglect yourself. And then also first aid, taking care of yourself and helping to take care of others. Because sometimes there's kind of injuries, if you will, when you're dealing with a really toxic person. Maybe you're being belittled in a meeting or embarrassed in front of other people, or you're being yelled at, or you might be leaving office in tears or something like that because someone was berating you so badly. How can we kind of apply some first aid to those kinds of situations? Firecraft, and the way we're going to talk about that is just your enthusiasm for the work. Often when there's a difficult situation in the interpersonal dynamics, our focus on our work and our enthusiasm for the work we do just goes right out the window, and we're just drained, and we just don't feel good about our work at all. And then lastly, signaling, which is asking for help, which is appropriate in both situations. So let's talk about PMA, positive mental attitude. There's actually two consistent elements across the survival stories that the Center for Creative Leadership gathered in their survey. And this is really, in a sense, where surviving a toxic boss kind of begins and ends here, is having the right attitude about it. And there's two elements of this. Number one, believe it or not, is laughter. Laughter can literally and figuratively provide perspective, kind of rebalances your emotions and produces a more positive attitude. Sometimes we can laugh at something, it's a little bit less scary. We kind of cut it down to size in our mind, so to speak. But just that act of laughing and that the mental mindset that allows us to find humor in the situation creates that bit of psychological distance so we don't feel so immersed in it. I think one of the problems with these kinds of situations is we just feel like we're steeped in this. We're just drowning in this negativity and this criticism and judgment or whatever it is this toxic boss is delivering to you. We're just stuck in it. And this just helps kind of help us pull away and say, this isn't the totality of my existence right now. There's still other parts of me and there's other parts of my life. It's very helpful in that way. And then secondly is gratitude. Gratitude can be a really strong pathway from being a sense of a victim to being a survivor. And I know in some ways that sort of sounds like the same role, but it's a little bit different. We can be victimized by something and we're really letting it get into us and damage us. And the survivor, it still bothers us, of course. We can't always eliminate that, but it's a sense, again, like I'm going to get through. So these can be very, very helpful. There's even been some research that I've read several times over the years that with gratitude, if people are suffering from like depression or anxiety, that keeping a gratitude journal, like every night before you go to bed, write down just like 3 things. Doesn't have to be 20 things, just like 3 things that day that you're grateful for. It could be something big like, wow, I actually, I got that big project done on time and I was getting a lot of positive feedback on it. Or it could be something really small like, I love the way the air smelled when I opened the window in my office today and it smelled so sweet and lovely. Or it was great, I took a hot shower at the end of a tough day and just feeling that hot water on my back. Could be just something like that. Certainly there's something that you can find that you feel gratitude, but again, it's just a mental shift. You're not so stuck in all that negativity. You actually find a little ray of light to move out of that, and that can be very, very helpful. And then also even taking it further and expressing gratitude to others, whether it's people that are helping you get through that situation at work, maybe a coworker that is having the same issues, and you guys are able to kind of, compare notes and support each other, or for someone outside of work, maybe it's your spouse, or your father, or somebody who really understands what you're going through rather, and is helping you with this, that kind of gratitude. Or just, you know what, I've had situations in my life where like walking down the street and somebody smiling at me was like, wow, that meant like a stranger smiling at me was like, that is so, like, I appreciate that so much. I've literally had times in my life like that. Any comments, questions, or reactions to that about positive mental attitude, maybe how you've used it or tried to cultivate it or anything like that? Again, I'm not going to force anybody to share, but anybody want to share anything? Okay, well, let's look at the next thing, shelter. And this is about creating both physical, which would be in a physically dangerous situation, either physical space or even just psychological space. Again, it's that creating that boundary, that little bit of distance between us and the situation. And so there's a couple ways you can do that. Maybe finding alternative places to work. If you're allowed to work hybrid, maybe spend as much time from your home office as you can, as long as you're not like directing undue attention to the fact that you're doing that. You're doing it within the parameters that they allow, things like that. Working in a conference room, maybe on a different floor in the building, so you just get away from the whole team, get away from the department, go to a local coffee shop and work there, just something that gives you that space away from all of that. If there's a company fitness center, taking time to go there, even if it's on your lunch hour, but at least you're physically getting out of the space of your office or being somewhere that you're likely to run into your boss or something like that. Using noise canceling headphones. That doesn't actually create space that you're getting out of there, but it creates psychological space because you're not listening to all the buzz in the office and maybe hearing your boss going off on somebody on the phone or talking sharply to a coworker in their cubicle or whatever it is. You kind of just cancel it out. It creates a little bit of quiet and calm and peace. Some other things you can do is investing time in hobbies. And some of these you can maybe even take to work, maybe do on your lunch or go to a nearby park and knit or something, whatever it is. But certainly at home to get a sense of hobbies can give us a sense of enjoyment, but a lot of hobbies are often creative, not necessarily like artistic. I don't mean that necessarily, but you're actually creating something, whether you're doing woodworking or you're knitting or, whatever it is, you're baking. Something that gives you a sense of achievement, a sense of accomplishment, and it can be if it's something you can enjoy, you can really get in that space of what they call flow, where you just get immersed in a task, and it can be very relaxing and even rejuvenating. And then volunteer work can be another place where you can be applying yourself, but getting a sense of achievement from it and a sense of contribution and being appreciated, which you often don't get from a toxic boss at all. So, and you may even want to make appointments with yourself on your calendar to do these kinds of things, because often when we work for a toxic boss, one of the problems is they overload you with work and you feel like I can't take any spare moment, and it's so easy to get pulled into just working like all the time, and just like committing to yourself, I am going to take this time, I'm carving out this time. And you may find that you're actually more productive when you do that, because you're not thinking about it all the time. You're giving yourself some respite from all the tension, and then when you come back to work, you can actually maybe perform a little bit better and be a little more clear-headed, kind of a thing. Reactions, again, comments. I know I'm talking kind of fast, but I don't want you at all to feel inhibited from asking a question or making a comment about something you've experienced or you've seen other people go through or whatever it might be. All right. Next is food and water, which in the corporate jungle that we're dealing with, we're going to think about that as maybe, of course, you have access to food and water, but to take care of yourself. One of the things that I found going through some stressful times is, we tend to think our mental energy and our physical energy are separate, and our mental health and physical health is separate. It actually is not. What I found is when I was in a difficult situation, I was spending so much time churning over all this difficult stuff I was dealing with that at the end of the day, I would be physically exhausted, not just mentally exhausted. I mean, I would I have to sleep. I'm gonna so exhausted. And it was just chewing up physical energy, even though I wasn't doing anything physical. I was sitting at a desk doing the stuff I normally do, but my mind was going in a whole different way. So take care of yourself. You need it now more than ever. It's one of those times where it's most likely to go out the window. Say, I don't have time. I'm too stressed. I can't even think about that. But that's actually when we need it the most. So stay hydrated, eat reasonably well, make sure you get enough sleep. If you're working from home, give yourself permission to take a nap. Sometimes I found even a 10-minute nap was restorative, whether it's at lunchtime or just take hey, you might likely go to coffee the coffee machine and go to the restroom. You could take up 10 minutes in the office. Take those 10 minutes and lay down at home and take a little nap. Getting exercise, getting up from your desk, walking for even 5 minutes around the building or around your house even. Go visit a distant restroom on another floor just so you can walk some more before you get there. Whatever it is, just kind of create, again, that space. I'm out of here, at least for a few minutes, I'm out of here. And that can be very, very helpful in a small way. The small things can really add up, and bad small things can add up too. So let's get some good small things going. All right, first aid. Again, there can be some injuries that we are experiencing in the survival situation that we're in at the office. And so things like people being belittled or marginalized or being demoted or things like that. So we may need to care for that. So doing so lets you take positive action. It allows you to move beyond being in fight or flight mode to tend and befriend. And this can help you better support the people that you supervise or your coworkers. So, and you can do this from any position. You don't have to be in a leader position to do these kinds of things. Just be looking out for other people that are maybe undergoing some of the same stuff from your boss that you're undergoing. And again, it just sort of turns the mindset just a little bit, and you feel like you're being useful. And it provides, so that usefulness provides a sense of purpose and meaning. And it also helps build your sense of support with among those around you. really, really helpful and creates a sense of camaraderie that we're going to get through this and we're going to get through it together. One of the things that happens, and I may end up saying this again because I find it to be extremely common, is when you're going through a situation like this, it sometimes feels like the loneliest thing in the world because you don't often hear your friends or acquaintances talking about a really, really bad boss like this. And so it's easy to feel like I'm the only one this is happening to. This is really strange and unusual and it never happens to other people, but I'm here to tell you it does because I'm in a position to talk to people about their careers and their jobs. And I've been doing it for a long time and I hear these kinds of stories. And I'm not saying it's everywhere and you can expect it all the time. Of course not. I don't want you to be pessimistic about it. People have great bosses and great coworkers and great teams, but there are a few people like this. And so it feels very lonely, but you're not alone. And it's kind of like people often don't talk about it with each other because they don't know who's experiencing the same thing. Like, is it just me and I don't want to draw attention to the problems I'm having? We may feel sort of embarrassed that it's happening. We have concerned people are thinking it's us, we're the problem, or whatever. There's just a lot of reasons where we feel very uncomfortable, like we want to hide it. And it's understandable, but it keeps us isolated. And other people may be feeling the same thing. And so I'm not saying you're going to go and talk about it with everybody, but if there's somebody that you really trust that you feel like you can kind of reach out and they might go, yeah, I noticed that. And did you see how he talked to so and so in the meeting? I was so mortified that he could talk to her, like, and I wanted to help, but I didn't know what to say or something like that. Now you realize, you know what? Other people are seeing the things you're seeing. So again, that sense of camaraderie, and we can get through this together, can be very valuable. And then firecraft is just that enthusiasm that we have for our work to get things done, to make things happen, to have an impact. That's still there. We still have our work to do. So if there's some way you can sort of focus on the work, help people around you, maybe give them positive feedback for something good that they did, and praise the team for getting something done, or whatever it is, but some way to kind of keep focus that we still value the work we do, regardless of how the boss is acting. Our work is our work, and we still can derive some value from that. And then lastly is signaling or asking for help. So surviving a toxic boss ideally is not a solo activity. Just like I said, there's lots of reasons that we feel isolated, and that isolation will sometimes keep us from asking for help because we feel embarrassed, or we think it's us, or we're not sure what people are going to think about us or think about the situation or whatever. Try to get over that because you're probably not the only one experiencing it, frankly. So you could seek support, certainly from career and leadership. We help with all kinds of career issues. And so we can maybe help you with it. Talking to a counselor or a therapist, maybe talking to an executive coach. Maybe you have some trusted colleagues in the department experiencing the same things, or in other departments. Or maybe they used to work for this person and they know what it's like to work for them, or maybe they don't. Doesn't really matter, maybe. But it could be someone really close to the situation or not, but a trusted colleague, maybe former colleagues, former classmates, clergy people might be someone you can turn to, or maybe the company has an employee assistance program, which are services that, as far as I know, really are confidential. It's not going to get back to your boss that you're doing that. Hopefully, I mean, check it out in your own company if you have one. So I can't speak to them all, but that's usually how they're designed. But do ask for help, because the reality is that knowing that you need help, being aware of that, recognizing I could use some help. This kind of overwhelming my capacities or my bandwidth to deal with stuff, and knowing that you need it and then actually taking the steps to ask for help can be a really difficult thing, which means it takes strength to do that. And that means it's really a sign of strength. It's not a sign of weakness. It actually takes courage to say, I can't do this on my own. I need to get help and I'm asking for it. So please consider that. Comments, questions, reactions. Don't be shy. We're all in this together, as I just said. I've been there myself, so I know what it's like.
Well, I can always make a comment.
Udo, I know you can. What would you like to make?
Well, I mean, I feel like I'm not entitled to, because I've missed 99% of everything with what's been going on. Even now, after I joined, I was on a call, but I had a situation which was serious. In fact, I had to confront a general manager, my boss, regarding a felony. And he really created a turmoil inside the entire organization.
Sure.
And this is the question. Other people, not me, actually went to the company and asked for ombudsman to get involved. They
Yep.
they assigned two ombudsmen, and each of them asked questions in just a one-on-one conversation.
Yep.
Um, the the strategy that I took was I was going to listen to their questions in a very legal-like manner and just answer what they ask
Okay.
and not go beyond. What I'm asking you, was that the right approach? Because in this case, the questions, they were like pointing out something is like having a light bulb burned out in the back of your car, as opposed to the fact that the boss was shooting a gun out the window and nicked somebody in the leg. They were all
Mhm.
ombudsman. We're not really getting to the meat of the issue. So the question is, that strategy right? Just answer exactly what they're asking, not elaborate.
It's hard to say because there's so many factors that, I mean, I know sometimes like when you watch a TV show or a movie about a court trial and the lawyer may advise the person who's going to be a witness, like just say this, not telling them what to say, but like don't go into a bunch of extraneous things, just answer exactly what they're asking you. So in some situations, I don't know, I think that might be above my pay grade, Udo, to know that and to just, I don't know about the situation. So I don't think that's an unreasonable thought at all. I could see why you might want to do that. On the other hand, there might be, maybe there would have been value to adding a little bit to the message. But I think the thing is, we're going to talk a little bit about, as one strategy is documenting things and things like that. And we'll talk a little bit about sort of how to document, what to document, and how the sort of pros and cons of bringing this to the attention of other people, to like hires up or HR. So we'll talk about, maybe that'll help.
Well, one related question, I'll be really quick. I mean, I
Yeah.
think everything depends on the company and the culture. But
Yes.
at the proverbial end of the day, the purpose of the ombudsman is to protect the company, in my opinion. If they can protect the company and protect or support you, they will. But their number one responsibility, in my experience, has been they're there to protect the company.
Well, you put that well. I sometimes tend to think ombuds people are a little bit more of a balance between the company and the people, but I can't disagree with you. In fact, one of the things I was going to say about HR is that lots of times HR, they can be helpful. It depends on their approach and how they handle that responsibility of HR. But often HR is there to sort of support management, actually,
Yes,
not the
yes.
individual workers, unfortunately. And so you really have to think carefully about who you turn to for help and can you trust them and what likely is to come out of it. So I don't think that's an outrageous thought at all that you're having. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hmm. So there's four strategies to deal with survival in physical environments, but also in the business environment. Endure, evade, resist, and escape. We're going to talk about each one of these. Now, not all of these strategies apply to all situations, so you really want to think carefully about it. We're going to talk a little bit about sort of the pros and cons of them. And you may want to talk this over with somebody, whether it's us at Career Leadership or a coach or a therapist or even just a friend or a family member that you value their wisdom, so to speak, to help you kind of figure out like, gee, which way do I want to approach this? And that can be helpful. So first of all, actually, it's the next thing, Udo, is this thing about cover your bases. So whatever this particularly applies to, if you're going to go to a higher authority, which is part of the resist strategy. But I wanted to bring it up front here because in some ways this could apply to anything, because you could be doing this sort of preventatively or proactively, and it can be very helpful. And especially if at some point right now you might not be thinking of going to anybody to sort of reporting this or making a complaint about this person, but maybe later you will. And also, so if you decide to appeal to authorities, this could be very helpful. It could be it's going to come to you, like you were saying, Udo, somebody else made a complaint and they're going to, and so the ombuds or the HR person or whomever, the ethics committee or something is going to come around and ask other people, so what's been your experience with this person, with this boss? What did you observe? And things like that. So you may be drawn into it anyway. And then also, unfortunately, sometimes it could be that they're going to come to you and they're going to accuse you of misbehavior. They're going to act, at least your boss. I'm not saying the whole company, although it could be, but your boss can make it like you're the problem. And so to have some documentation of what's been happening can be very valuable. So this is one of the most frequently mentioned action steps in the Center for Creative Leadership's survey about like how did people, what did they do when they were dealing with the toxic boss? And this is basically documenting or collecting evidence of the boss's bad behavior. So saving emails they wrote maybe something nasty or inappropriate to you, or what you wrote to them that was actually very professional and appropriate and problem solving oriented, taking notes at meetings, whatever it is just sort of document it and document it kind of as it's happening, because sometimes it's hard to reconstruct that in your mind. And as you do that, try to keep it as factual as possible. And what I mean by that is just record exactly what was said, what was observed, what you saw. Try not to get into too much. This is what I think they meant. Of course, he was saying it for this reason. He had this kind of an attitude. You actually don't know what's going on inside somebody's mind. And even though from their behavior, you could reasonably assume certain attitudes are behind it, and you might very likely be right. It keeps you from getting into a he said, she said thing. So like you say something to HR about something the boss did, and then the boss talks to the guy and they come back and say, well, he didn't mean it that way. He was actually meant blah, blah, blah. And then the HR, well, we really don't know. We can't really find the truth. You're saying this, he's saying that, and there's no way for us to know. So it makes it all vague and fuzzy. It's easy for the person, the boss, to kind of refute it. It makes it a little more easy, and because it's just vague and it's all opinion. So try to keep it really factual, and that usually works a little bit better. In your side yourself of what you think it means, and it could be everybody on the team perceive their behavior the same way, but what was actually happening usually strengthens your argument. All right, so let's get into these 4 ways. The first is endure, and endure is basically, staying put, staying in the job, putting up with it at least for a while. Notice I said for a while. It is best as a short-term solution or to a short-term problem. The risk is that the toxic situation persists longer than expected. So it really isn't, in some ways, there's not a lot of situations where this actually fits tightly, because often these situations are not short-term. The boss is the boss, and they're likely not going to change unless you think they're on their way out voluntarily or involuntarily. That might be different. Then you might just wait it out. But otherwise, it's probably not necessarily short-term, or you don't know if it's short-term. And so it's either not short-term, or there's really no end in sight. They don't sound like they're going anywhere, and you might be stuck working with them or for them for a really long time. So that's the trouble with this approach. Part of this enduring approach is to adapt. And you may not have thought of this, but it can work. It takes some thought how to do it well. But basically what I'm talking about here is stepping back and identifying the boss's priorities, maybe even having a conversation with them about it, and try to meet their priorities in order to reduce some of the tension and the conflict. In other words, get them off your back. They may like to do things in a way you wouldn't naturally do it. You don't like doing that way. You actually think it's kind of stupid. But unfortunately, they are your boss. They are in a position to evaluate you. They maybe have some power and control over your job. And so you might say, you know what, I normally wouldn't do it this way, but to make them happy, I maybe need to be flexible and try to do it the way they want to do it. As long as you're not doing anything that's unethical, immoral, or as Udo shared with us, illegal. This person was committing a felony. You don't want to go along with that. You could get tied up in it if it comes to, to the awareness of authorities, and you'd be like, you were someone who colluded with this or whatever, agreed to it. So don't do anything that's immoral or illegal, but maybe there's ways you can sort of try to mitigate this. I had a situation once with a boss. I don't know if they were actually toxic, but they were pretty darn difficult. They were borderline, at least. And the first review that I had with them was not very good. I've always had very good reviews. This is the first time I had sort of like this mediocre review. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great. And the next time I had a review, I went in there and said, what am I going to do with this? This is really driving me nuts, because there was other problems too. So I went in and said, you know what? this person is my boss. I got to give them what they want if I'm going to survive this. So I went into the meeting and I said, look, I know people have different ways of evaluating people, how they apply scale. Some people are generous with 4s and 5s, which is the top of the scale. And some people never give that out unless you're absolutely incredible. And like, I would really like to know, like, your perspective on this. What does it take to get a 4 or 5 in your eyes? Not that I didn't have some. I don't think I had any 5s, but maybe 4. But what does it take? I'd like to understand your perspective and how I can better meet your expectations. And we had a pretty good conversation about it. And at the end of the conversation, this person said to me, thank you. I really appreciate how you handled this. Because I think they were expecting I was going to resist or disagree or, whatever. Now, our relationship got better after that. Was it good? No, it was never good, but it was better. So it did shift things a little bit, which I appreciated for myself that I did do that. Now, you might try it, it wouldn't work. I can't say it's always going to work that way, but that can be an approach. And so the key, as I said, is to find ways to work within their parameters of what they want without either compromising yourself, like doing anything you think is unethical, but also without becoming phony and manipulative yourself. In other words, don't act like you're in love with them and you just, oh, you're so thrilled to work for them and you really don't like this person and you don't have a lot of respect for them. I mean, don't go overboard. I think it's better to just stay true to how you feel. You don't display all your negative feelings to them, but keep true to yourself. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Seek some support. Sometimes just talking about it, just getting it off your chest to somebody helps. Somebody hears it. Somebody sees and hears what you're going through can alleviate a good bit of it. Just be sure that your concerns don't dominate your personal relationship. Like if you're talking about this with your wife or your parents or your kids or your neighbor, whoever it is, your best friend, make sure you're not like that's all they hear from you lately is about your job and how awful it is. And you might even ask them or tell them, look, I'd love to just, I've been going through some stuff at work. If I could share some, I just really need to get off my chest, but don't let me go on too long. I don't want to wear you out and I don't want this call to be all about this. And I want to hear about how you're doing too. So, I mean, just be honest about it. Say, call me on it if I'm doing this too much. I don't want this to take over. So that could be an approach. And this is what I was just saying about staying true to yourself. Be professional at all times as much as you can. Be ethical. Refuse to engage in toxic behaviors yourself. When other people are angry, it's really easy to get angry. When people are snide or sarcastic, it's really easy to return it. Don't give in to that impulse. Don't let this situation change who you are. If you're not that kind of person, don't be that kind of person now. And I think you'll be glad when this is over with, and it will be over with someday. You'll be glad that you didn't compromise yourself in that fashion. Focus on the work if you're staying in the jobs. Stop expecting fairness or appreciation even from the boss. You're not going to get it. So don't keep looking for it and whatever. I mean, you have a right to expect that, of course, but you're not going to get it from them. It's just not realistic. That's not what they are. That's not how they do it. But you can focus on any positive feedback you get from your team, from your peers, from other managers in other departments. Maybe you did a project for clients, customers, or whatever. Hang on to that. We tend to pay so much attention to the negative things in our lives that they loom really gigantic in our psychological landscape. Make an effort to not pay so much attention to those things, but pay attention to the positive things. Take time to savor that. Instead of keep thinking about a weird comment somebody said to you at a staff meeting and you're thinking about it for 3 days, think about something nice somebody said. I mean, think about that for 3 days. How often do you do that? I know I think of it and I'm on to something else. Think about it, dwell on it. And also just pay attention when you're doing a good job. You know when you're doing a good job, like, man, that report came out really well. I really like the way I wrote it. And I think I organized it. It looks really attractive and it's really easy to read. I'm feeling good about that. Again, pay attention to that and hang on to it. You have to counterbalance all that negativity that you're getting from the boss. And then focus on your career longer term. And that might mean taking some steps to kind of position yourself for the next thing. Maybe you're not ready to change jobs at the moment, but maybe taking a few little steps to think about your future, maybe do some goal setting, update your resume, revise your LinkedIn profile. It helps create a sense of proactivity, like you do have choices. I can do something else, even if I'm not ready to do that now. And it also helps you feel reassured that if I decide to leave or I need to leave, I'm prepared. I'm not going to be starting from square one if somehow if I lose my job. I've already got some things in place and I'm ready to get going. And that can be a comfort. Any comments or questions before we move to the next strategy, which is evade? And I know we're at, actually, we were not at the top of the hour. I must have turned on my, okay, I'm sorry. I had the timer in Zoom. It looked like I was over an hour, but I'm not there yet. So we're doing good. Because I started my Zoom earlier than when the session started. Any comments or questions before we move into evade? Okay, so evade is about staying in the job. So it's kind of like endure, but it's a little more actively trying to reduce your exposure to the toxicity that you're experiencing. So one way to do that is lay low. We talked about that, talked about shelter. It's kind of pretty much the same thing. Minimizing the amounts and the kinds of contact you have with your boss. So if you can work from home as much as you can. Maybe try to find a way to reduce the number of meetings you have with your boss, or at least one-on-one meetings. Uh, Maybe just switching from an in-person meeting with your boss, like say your weekly, maybe suggest, I think things are, whatever, maybe we could just meet once every 2 weeks and instead of every week for our one-on-one. Or, maybe we could just meet by Zoom or by phone. But anything, sometimes just getting that person not physically in your face creates a little bit of space and alleviates some of that tension. It's still not pleasant, but it might be better than just being face to face with them. Um, Maybe even check your boss's calendar and make plans to be somewhere else when they're likely to be free and roaming around the office looking for things to complain about or whatever. Be in a meeting, be in a Zoom meeting or something. Have a meeting with someone in another department you're collaborating with and schedule it when they're usually free and up and about, just to kind of reduce that exposure. Another strategy is to try to ignore the toxicity. And the thing is that some of these types of personalities, some of them may not realize they're doing this or it's not intentional, but I do think there's some people who actually like to upset others. They get a sense of satisfaction, like I'm in control and they're not. They're feeling unstable and uncertain. I've kind of rattled them and it makes me feel powerful or big or in control or something like that. Don't take the bait. Realize that's what's going on. It's kind of like a psychological warfare. Don't take the bait. Don't give them the satisfaction of seeing you rattled. Now, I know this is easier said than done. You can't always do it, but it might be good to try to cultivate that a little bit. Again, it creates that psychological space between you and them, that boundary. And remind yourself that you do have choices regarding how to respond. Lots of times we think, well, he said this or she said this to me and I was running this. How else can I respond? Of course it was aggravating. Da, 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 da. Well, yeah, of course it is aggravating, but that doesn't mean you're not in control of your behavior. You may have more control over certainly how you behave, what you say, but even what you think more than you realize. Um, and so just sort of cultivating that. If it takes taking a little deep breath, so remind yourself, I do have response. I can handle this whatever way I want to. I don't have to just respond in a knee-jerk fashion. Um, and Also, sometimes I know this seems kind of corny and weird, but it can actually help. Is just visualizing something. Visualizing something. Like I don't know if you know this, but like there's a whole area of sports psychology that a consultant or psychologist or something may come in and teach athletes to like picture themselves making the shot and it going very well and like practice in their mind, and it actually improves their performance. I mean, I don't know the statistics or anything, how well it improves their performance versus actually doing the task, making the hit or the jump or whatever it is. But it actually does. I mean, they've known this like decades and decades ago. So there is something about going through something in our mind. So sometimes just visualizing that there's this boundary. And the way I tend to think of it is like if you ever watch Star Trek and they say shields up, like there was some kind of force field they put around the Enterprise to protect them from like the incoming, like sort of, I don't know what they were, like electronic torpedoes or whatever coming from the enemy ships or something. But just sort of like, okay, they're going off, blah, blah, blah. But there's this insulation, there's this force field, that my shields are up and it's just sort of bouncing off of me. It just kind of creates that sense that it's kind of okay. And one thing that you can think about is, this is kind of a weird thing, but I think this can be helpful too. If you were talking to someone that had, they were incapacitated mentally, maybe they had dementia or something, you probably wouldn't respond to them the same way as you would that someone was asking that way. Like, for example, if you go to visit your grandmother, God forbid, she's got dementia, she can't find her purse and she gets upset and she thinks that you stole her purse. And normally she would never say that or even remotely think that of you. But you know that it's really not her talking, it's the dementia. You're not going to get angry and hurt in the same way. You might feel initially a little angry and hurt, but you kind of tell yourself, look, grandma doesn't mean that. She knows I didn't take the purse. It just, the dementia is making her think some. She's feeling scared and out of control. And so she's, acting up this way. But respond the same way. So sometimes even thinking about them that way, look, this person's got insecurities. They've got some kind of problems. They feel excessive need to be in control or put other people down. That's just their thing. I'm not going to get into it with them. Sometimes that can help. So again, any of these strategies gives you a sense of control and empowerment. Like, I've got choices of how to respond. I don't have to be just a victim of circumstance. Whatever this person says or does to me, I've just got to go into a tailspin over it. Maybe you don't need to. Now, the next strategy, the third one, is resist. Okay. Now, this you have to be super cautious about, because if it doesn't go well, it can end very badly, including losing your job. So this is kind of a high stakes method to deal with it. And you need to be very careful in considering the implications. How will your actions, your statements, whatever you end up doing, how will it be received? How will it be perceived? And what will likely happen because you did this? So think very, very carefully about this, because you can't go back. That's the thing. Once you make a complaint or talk to your boss's boss or go to HR or the ombudsman or ombudswoman or whatever it is, you can't take it back. It's out there now. And it may, depending on what it is, it may not get to your boss right away or may not get to them at all, but it might, because if you're going to make a complaint, somebody has to confront the boss with their behavior. And they may either suspect it to you. I don't know if I don't know how that works, to be honest. If they tell you, if they tell the person where the complaint's coming from or what, I don't know. But it's kind of thing, you can't undo it, you can't undo it. So be very careful with it. And I'm not saying you should never do it at all, but I'm just saying just think carefully, because sometimes you feel like, I'm just going to go complain and I'm going to let his boss know that he's acting that way, or you may think that's going to feel good, but you have to think about what's really going to happen to you. Even if you feel like, I don't care what happens to her because she's a terrible boss and she's evil or something, she's a horrible person, but what's going to happen to you because you bring it up. Okay. So this might one way to do it is give feedback to the boss, actually. And this might get you somewhere if the boss is just difficult versus truly toxic. Okay. And by the way, I forgot to mention, one of the handouts that I sent out with this session is a toxic boss checklist. And it's got a number of attributes of difficult bosses. And you just check off the ones that are a lot like your boss, like most of the time. And then you can kind of look and see which of these behaviors more sort of lean towards a difficult boss and which ones lean more towards saying this is probably a toxic boss. And then another sign is, I don't know if I said this earlier, I don't think I did, but if you're like trying to work through some things with the boss and like no matter what you do, it doesn't seem to make any difference, that alone can be a sign you're actually dealing with a toxic boss, that they're just not open to feedback or anything at all, because most people they may not like it, but they're, probably pay some attention to it. But anyway, so you might get there if they're just difficult, but truly toxic bosses, that's what I was just saying, are likely not to be receptive. But taking it a step further, they might not be receptive. There might actually be retaliation for bringing it forward. That's the part that's difficult. You really don't want to bring on that retaliation. So think carefully if that is likely to happen. Similarly, instead of giving feedback to the boss, is to appeal to higher authorities. And the higher authorities are usually like your boss's boss, senior leadership. If you're at the senior leadership level yourself, maybe you're in the C-suite, then you might be appealing to someone or someone's on the board. You might go to HR, you might go to an ombuds, like Udo mentioned. But carefully think about, what do you know of these people and do you trust them? Because if you don't know them very well, or maybe you've heard some negative things about them, or you've witnessed some things like, I think they're just protecting top management. I don't think they're really going to be helpful to me. Well, then don't go to them. I mean, be smart about it. It's difficult to face that, but it's better to face that than to go to these people and then it actually sort of blows up in your face and it actually makes it worse. And the reason I say that is when I was doing some research for this session, I came across this website called the Workplace Bullying Institute. And they did a study and they found that in 40% of the situations where someone did issue a complaint or go to a higher authority, only 40% of those situations turned out favorably for the person making the complaint, which means 60% of those situations, the bullying actually got worse because like the company like ignored it and the person felt like it was okay for them to keep doing it, or they actually encouraged it, or they retaliated and made out like you were the problem or whatever it is. So really think carefully about what you know about the culture and the particular players and who might be receptive and who might be really uh, fair and have integrity to be willing to step up and say something about it and not just kind of play politics with the situation and stuff like that. So think very carefully about that. And again, I hope this doesn't sound like I'm saying you should never do that. I'm just saying, just be careful with it because it's like, it's all or nothing. You either go all the way and you try to make it work. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And part of that is thinking about, can I put up with the fallout? If it's like, if they end up asking me to leave or if it becomes untenable, I have to leave, then I guess I'll leave. But I think it's the right thing to do to say something. Maybe you want to say something just so that they quit hurting other people, not just yourself. Maybe it's not just about yourself. You just think this person needs to be confronted on this. And then you're going to do it and look, hey, if they can't hear it and I get fired or something, well, then that's fine. Then I'll go find another job. I mean, if you feel okay with that, then that's, then that might be fine. So just think carefully about it. Comments, reactions. I know we're just at the top of the hour and we're actually not, we're almost, I think we're almost done. Not too far away. All right. The next strategy is to escape. And this means leaving the job in the department or even the whole organization. In other words, leaving your employer, leaving the company. And this is often seen as a last resort, but I have to ask, does it have to be a last resort? Why do we have to keep waiting? And like, if it's so awful, that's the only time I'm going to do this. But I'll put this into context for you. For some reason, a lot of people give me the impression that they feel like they need to have a big compelling reason to leave their job. They can't just leave it because they want to. It's like, yeah, they might feel like, if I talk to my husband or my parents or something, they might say, you've got a good job, you make good money. What do you mean you're going to leave your job? What are you talking about? The economy's kind of rough right now or whatever. And like, gee, gosh, maybe I'm being foolish. I have a good job. I better stay here. Why? Maybe just want to do something different. That's okay too. But tell you the truth, I think having a toxic boss, that is a big reason. That's a compelling reason to leave, And I'm not saying all of you should go out and leave your jobs. I'm just saying that's a legitimate reason. So that's an option for you. You can decide not to take it, but it is a reasonable option. So one of the things you can do with this is think about whatever it is about this boss and what behavior and what you know about them and how long you've known them and everything. How likely is it that the situation is going to change? Maybe they're not going to change, but maybe you think, I have reason to believe that hires up know about this person and that they might be asked to leave soon. So maybe you wait it out. Or they've been making comments like they're looking for a job, so maybe they're going to leave soon and it'll be over with or whatever. But think about it carefully. Think, I don't think this is going to change. I don't think she's going anywhere. And I don't think anybody sees what she's doing. And I'm really not in a position, I don't feel comfortable, making some kind of a complaint or whatever. It's not likely going to change. Then you have to ask yourself, what are you waiting for? Now, I'm not saying you should run off and find a new job. There may be good reasons why this is not a good time for you to find a new job. That's fine. But do think if there aren't those things, then what are you waiting for? Because why would it be better to leave in 2 years than it is now? And do you really want to be working for this person for the next year or 3 years or 5 years? Before you know it, might be 8 years you're working under this stuff. So you just need to think about, like, what's keeping me? And sometimes that's a good way to ask the question, what's holding me back? What's keeping me from doing that? And you might come to understand what really is stopping, and there might be some valid things to stop to keep you there, for at least for now. So consider other factors to determine if the time is right and if it is right to move. And if it isn't right time, then use another strategy. Then use some of these other strategies like evade, or what was the first one? Endure, But try not to wait until actual damage is done to a lot of things: your self-esteem, your confidence, your sense of what you can do with your career, your relationships, maybe with people around you, and your physical and mental health. Because unfortunately, it can get to that point. It can get to the point that this tension from a toxic boss can make people physically ill. And I've heard this a number of times. And you please try not to let it get to that point. If you can, I know you may in a situation you're juggling a line, you're like, I can't do this right now and whatever. So I understand that, but that's an important factor too, is don't let it really actually damage you. So one of the ways to escape is to move to a new role. Just get out from under that manager. Some companies, their culture is monolithic. Everybody, no matter where you go in the company, the culture is a certain way, positive or negative. Some companies I know, it's not that way. It depends on what department you're in, what boss you have. Some bosses are great, and then people are lovely and happy and engaged in their work, and other bosses are horrible, and it's a terrible department to work in, and everybody knows it. So it just sort of depends. But you might move up, you might move laterally, you might even move down. Those can all be good options depending on the situation. Sometimes they, well, gee, I don't want to move down. I don't want to take less responsibility. You know what? Maybe you could use less responsibility. You need to rest a little bit while you're working. Or, is it worth your mental health? Maybe it's worth it. Okay, you're going down a little bit, but you're gaining your mental health back, your well-being. It might be worth it. And maybe you feel like if I could get away from this guy or this woman, move down, and then I can kind of go up through another path, actually would be good. There's actually some room for advancement. Now this only works, I kind of mentioned this in passing, it only works if your boss's behavior is not indicative of an overall dysfunctional organizational culture. If it's all that way through the whole company, then moving to a new role, that's not going to help you. You're just going to have a whole new set of headaches, and you have the stress of adjusting to a new boss and a new bunch of headaches. So think about that. What's the actually the overall organizational culture like? Now, of course, you can also move to a new employer, and that's kind of the ultimate escape, and it can be a very good choice. But unless the need to escape is urgent, give yourself time to plan an effective search. It's actually going to save you time in the long run. So don't feel like you have to run out the door right this minute, unless you really feel like there is compelling reasons why you need to get out right away. But if not, give yourself time, work on it a little bit at a time so that you're not overwhelmed with job search on top of all the stress you're undergoing at work. Maybe plan time into your week every week to devote to your job search, even if it's just a couple hours. And then, of course, use our resources. We have tons of resources on just about every aspect of job search. We have live webinars like this one. We've got videos like this one. We've got written content. We've got worksheets, checklists, samples and examples, one-on-one coaching. I mean, that's why we're here. So don't hesitate to take advantage of us. Now, you might take a leave of absence. This is only a temporary fix, of course, but it might provide you with some respite from all the tension, and also time and space to refresh a little bit and rethink how you want to go forward. Are you going to evade? Are you going to escape? What are you going to do? You're going to look for another job in another company, or what are you going to do? Gives you time to think about that when you're not under the pressure of being in the situation at the same time. This may or may not mean that you're taking leave without pay. And one thing to think about is, will you need your boss's approval? And is there a way to do that without telling them why you're doing it? Like, can you just say, your company has a policy for leave of absence. Maybe you can just go to HR and get it approved and say, for personal reasons, I need some time off. I'm under a certain amount of stress and blah, blah, blah. And the boss will never know exactly what it's about, So just think carefully how that would work, for you. And then the last option for escape is actually to just resign. And of course, if you go to a new job, you're going to resign. But obviously, what I'm talking about here is like you're resigning without another job. You're just quitting. You have no job. You're just quitting. Now, this is not something I usually recommend, and most coaches probably don't recommend. Um, but if your mental or physical health is being compromised, it may be exactly the right thing to do, because you don't, some people say, well, there's some kind of saying about if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. And that's kind of true. I mean, that's the foundation of everything else you do in life. So if it's hurting your health, you might say, you know what, I just have to get out of here. And so there's things to consider though. So some other things factors that will come into this decision is what's going on in the economy, what's going on in the job market, in your job market. In other words, your functional area, your industry, your level, things like that. What else are you juggling? Maybe you've got things at home that you're juggling that are adding to your stress. Um, Maybe you just had a new baby. Maybe you're caring for an elderly parent. Excuse me. Um, Maybe your spouse just got a new job and you're like, there's a little bit of risk for taking a new job. What if it doesn't work out for him and you're you're going to be unemployed? Like you want one of you to be in this really stable situation before something like this is approached. So think about that. Uh, think about two things. How financially prepared are you and your family to weather a lack of employment? Do you have some reserves? How long can you go? Does your spouse have a solid job with good earnings? So even if you were in a protracted period of unemployment, you guys would be fine or not. I mean, really think about it and talk with them about it. Make sure you both feel like I need to do this and we can get through this together. We've got the resources to do it. The second thing you need to consider is how emotionally prepared you and your family are to deal with the uncertainty of being without a job. I've seen people that have approached job loss and they don't like it. It's unpleasant. It creates a certain amount of anxiety, but they're kind of okay with it. They're sort of optimistic and confident, like, no, I've been through this before. I'm pretty confident I can do it, or I know my skills in pretty high demand, and I'm sure something's going to work out. And I enjoy the job search process, and I love to network and blah blah blah. And then I've seen people who just don't do well with it at all. I mean, they're still very talented people, wonderful, lovely people, but that the uncertainty of job loss is it's not a good situation for them, and it's very, very challenging. And so that would factor in, whether they should leave without a job or not. So comments, questions, reactions, we're almost done.
Hi, this is Amanda
Yes.
speaking. I think the escape approach might be the hardest. You kind of asked rhetorically earlier why we don't, or why people don't typically choose this as the first option. I think a lot of it is the anxiety you spoke to, not really anticipating that they're not going to be emotionally or financially prepared for that situation. That's undetermined. How
Sure.
long it take for you to get a job, and if you have a job right away, if you'll fit in there. But I also think sometimes it's deeper than that. You kind of don't realize that your threshold has changed, your tolerance for taking on or being in a toxic work environment, being in a toxic relationship with your boss. It kind of becomes your new normal. And if other
Yes.
people are unfortunately impacted by that or experiencing the same thing, you might commiserate together, trusted confidants,
Yep.
but you won't necessarily feel like, until something explosive happens or particularly bad incident, you might not feel like it's worth putting more effort into. I'm just trying to make it through the day. I'm just trying to make it to 5 o'clock.
Yes. Yes.
And I know for me, when I've had this experience, I was somewhat isolated, completely remote team.
Ah,
A lot of it felt like, okay, this person is difficult. We wouldn't have said this person is toxic. We didn't, I mean, just until like 5:30 when I got your email, I wouldn't have had that distinction. This person is difficult. This person is toxic. It's pretty synonymous.
yeah, right.
And I thought I kind of took a lot of, I knew this boss was not behaving in a healthy manner, but I think my team and I kind of took a lot of those things on ourselves. We know we just need to manage and mitigate this person. They're not going to like, this font. That's going to be a screaming match. So we just don't use that font. We use this other font. And we kind of tiptoed around and had
Yeah.
strategies for working with this person
Yes.
instead of addressing the issue. And
Yes.
time like an issue erupted where we had to get, HR involved. It very much was like, hey, we've kind of been telling you that this was a problem. We've been doing the reports, but
Yeah.
nothing seemed to, I don't know how else to say it, nothing seemed to stick. Nothing seemed like it was big enough. Oh, this person yelled or raised their voice in a meeting, but that's really subjective, and they didn't use, foul language or something like that. This person is just difficult. It wasn't cause for alarm until it really was, and then the perspective of everything really changed. So the
Yes.
idea of like quitting a good job seems even more fraught and more dangerous, because it's kind of like a mind trip.
It is kind of a mind trip, and I'm glad you brought those things up. There was something you just said that I'm trying to think of what it was now. It kind of flew out of my mind. That I actually had on a slide, and I was trying to cut this down to size, and this was too long for the hour, but there was something, I wish I could remember what it was that you said. But oh, it's just not coming to me. I do apologize. But yeah, no, those are all great points, and I appreciate you sharing. I guess it's trying to think consciously, space to think, because I think what happens is we tend to think, okay, yeah, but it's sort of, again, it's a good job, so I should just keep plowing ahead. But I know my experience was, I ended up having some health issues, and it didn't happen like immediately, but I'm pretty sure it contributed to those showing up eventually, because there was a long period of time where I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't exercising. I wasn't eating as well. I wasn't sleeping as well, and things like that. And so it kind of accumulated. But here's what I've said to people many times since then, because I learned it the hard way, is that especially when you're younger and more resilient, you think you can just keep pushing through and keep pushing through and keep tolerating this stuff. And you can just, I'll just make it. I'll just keep pushing. And you can until you can't. And then all of a sudden your body goes, no, can't do it anymore. I'm not putting up with this anymore. And now you got a whole other set of problems. So it's kind of a thing. I totally understand it. But in some ways it is short-sighted to say, well, I can keep doing this, but like maybe not. Maybe that's not a good thing. Like we think we can absorb all that negativity and stuff, but it may be taking a toll on us. But again, you do have to judge everything that's going on and what's going on in the economy and whatnot. It's hard to find the time. I mean, I know when I was going through it, I didn't feel like I had the time to be looking for work, and I felt like this choice, I just didn't feel up for it, frankly, because of other life situation things that were going on. Um, so it's difficult, and that's why I wanted to do a session on this, because often people just have no idea how to handle it. Do you feel like in hindsight that was um, like, do you wish you could have maybe gotten out of it faster, or you feel like no, that was in this situation, it actually was the best thing to do? I mean, because you were there, I'm sure there was multiple factors and things pressing on the situation.
Um, I was
Hard to
going through
say.
a really difficult, challenging part of my life personally. So the idea of taking on another challenge, I can understand why I didn't take that option, but
Yes.
I've since had like coaching and mentoring, and what comes up a lot for me is like you need to bet on yourself. Your resume
Oh,
with you everywhere you are, all the skills, all the experiences,
yeah.
go with you. And I may have, gone to an MBA program earlier. I may have pursued different jobs earlier if I had kind of
Yeah.
bet on myself. But
Yeah.
at that time, I just didn't have a lot of confidence professionally, and I just wasn't in a good
Sure.
personally. So I have a lot of like empathy for my past self. But yeah, I kind of
Yeah.
that I had gotten out of that situation earlier. I will say that it is still a really proud moment, because like in the scope of my career, because I acted in a way that I'm proud of.
Good.
I didn't
Good.
associate with myself with this person outside of what I had to do. And when the investigation happened and when things were said and we had to document everything, I felt really good about what I had done and the way I behaved
Good.
with this boss. So
Yeah, and I appreciate
it
you
became
sharing
a
that.
point of confidence.
Yeah, because I was mentioning that earlier, so I appreciate you kind of validating that for us, that was the right thing to do, is just keep true to yourself and behave how you normally would behave. and you'll feel better about it in the long run. And I'm not saying any of this to challenge anybody's decisions, because nobody knows except the person in that situation. And I think even for yourself, and I don't hear you doing this, Amanda, but I could see someone looking back at at their own situation saying, gee, I should have done this, or I should have done that. It's like, you know what, you probably had good reasons. I mean, you might want to consider that when you have the time and space to do that, and say, what can I learn from that situation? But it's not to beat yourself up or blame yourself, but say, give yourself a break. You were dealing with a lot, maybe you had things in your personal life. You made the best decision you could at the time, you know? And even sometimes, this is just another thing, but it's kind of related, is sometimes it's kind of weird. We tend to judge our decisions by how they turned out. So say it didn't turn out well, that you did whatever you did or didn't do whatever you did. And sometimes we tend to blame ourselves for that, and see our decision as it's a bad decision because it turned out that way. And it's like, actually, no. I think a good decision is how you make the decision. We can't foresee the future. We don't know what's going to happen. And so sometimes you make the right decision for the right reasons and it still doesn't turn out well. And sometimes you make a decision not for the right reasons and it does turn out well. So we can't really judge our decisions by what happens, because there's too many other factors that determine what happens. It's not only based on our decision. So we have to have give ourselves some grace about how we've handled things in the past and learn from it. And I'm glad that, you know, it sounds like you've learned from it, and ultimately you did gain the confidence to get into the MBA program and so on and so forth. And so good for you. I mean, good for you that you got through that. Sounds like with some grace and keeping yourself intact. So awesome. Let me share with you these last final thoughts, which is just kind of a recap. And then again, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording, and then I'm happy to stay and chat with people if they want to talk a little bit more. But first of all, there is life after this job or organization. I know sometimes, especially if you've worked in a place for a while, it could feel like this is just it. This has been my life for so long. This just is my life. It's like, no, this is just an organization. This is one company. This was one organization. This is one employer. There's things beyond this, number one. Also, be true to yourself. We were just talking about that. Don't let this change who you are. And it's not just your behavior becoming phony yourself or political or whatever, but just being bitter or whatever. Don't give them the satisfaction of making you a bitter or frightened or whatever person as much as you can. Take care of yourself, including seeking support. I know it's so easy for that to go out to the window, but it's important too. We just have to balance that out. Think carefully about what you realistically hope to achieve. If you're going to take some action or approach something a certain way, really think about why do I want to do it? What do I think is what I want to happen if I do that? If I say this, if I give the boss this input, if I go to HR, what am I hoping that's going to produce? And then think really carefully about what likely might be the reactions back. That's the most important thing. People forget that. They get really caught up on, I just want to tell somebody something, or I want to, let them know that this, okay, I understand that, but what's going to happen because of that? That's what you need to think about. And that may mean you have to change your approach a little bit. Maybe you're still going to take the action, but you're going to do it a little bit differently. But give some thought to what's realistically going to happen. Don't have fantasies of what's going to happen. Number, whatever this is, 7 or 6 or something, you're not alone. This happens, unfortunately. I wish it never happened, but it does. And you're not alone, even though you may feel like nobody else you've ever heard of is having a problem like you're having. That's not true. And if that's any comfort to you, and likely it's not you, it's all about that other person. Are there some things maybe you could have handled better? Maybe, perhaps, but don't take on a burden of guilt on things that aren't yours. If your boss behaves badly, and that, especially if they're like that to everybody, it's your boss. And actually, sometimes the situation I had, this boss acted differently with different people. They sort of played favorites, but I did find out there was a couple of other people that had the same issues I had, and that was quite a comfort to me. Like you said, you could commiserate a little bit. It still was difficult, but at least I knew it wasn't just me. And then lastly, you are going to get through this. You are going to get through this. Hopefully, I'm hoping, and even in some small way, you feel like you've got some options of how to respond. Even if you stay in the situation, maybe you've got some option to change or get out of the situation, but one way or the other, you're going to get through this. And I hope that is much sooner than later for all of you.